have a great lineup of speakers today. Our themes are including our pipeline, looking at high school to career, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion topics this morning. These are helpful as we build upon and look toward our vision of the summit to create that clear educational pathway and seamless transition from entry in the field through baccalaureate degree. And it's available to early childhood educators and teach scholars whose goal is to teach and or support the education of children birth to third grade. So without further ado, I will introduce Denise Bishop from the Children's Forum. So the Children's Forum is actually in Florida, and they are our counterpart there in Florida. As we administer Teach here in Ohio, they administer it in Florida. So we're very excited to have Denise with us to talk about their high school to career pipeline. Hi, Denise.
Hey, good morning. Thank you
Good
so
morning.
much. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, definitely you've been provided co-host rights here and the permissions. So I'll stop sharing so that you can share your slides.
Okay, are you pulling up the presentation or am I pulling up the presentation?
If you could pull up the presentation, that would be great. That way you can control how you'd like to advance the slides.
Okay, sorry, I wasn't prepped for that, but I can do it very quickly. Okie dokie.
While you're doing that, Denise, we did have a question that came in, a summit question that I'll go ahead and answer. Okay. We do not have Ohio approval credit for the summit this time. Many of the participants don't require that credit as a part of with the higher education, so we do not go through that process. And we definitely will be including the PowerPoints with the recordings on the website. So definitely we'll be able to see all of that information as well.
Let me see if I've got this set. Are you able to see my screen?
We are.
Okay, very good. Let me try and move it to my other monitor. Well, there's two ways to handle this. I'm just gonna move my camera.
There you go. Yes, all of this great technology for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I just get that right. All right, that should work for us. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm going to apologize up front if there's any redundancy in what I discussed, because I haven't had an opportunity to get on the other sessions. So just bear with me. And if there is, we'll move through quickly. As was mentioned, I work in Florida at a nonprofit organization called the Children's Forum, and we administer programs and develop policy designed to support and strengthen the early childhood education workforce. So that's a big part of what we do. And of course, Teach is one of those. So I have an aspirational agenda here. Probably not going to get through all of this. But what I really want to focus on in particular is the early childhood career and technical education secondary level program that we implemented a few years back and have continued to administer. Talk real briefly about the landscape in Florida for early childhood education. I think as with most states in the country, we've seen significant changes that have gone from pre-pandemic, and I have in my next slide post-pandemic. I think that's a little optimistic. I think we're kind of peri-pandemic right now, sort of in the middle of it. So I want to talk a little bit about that, the challenges around recruiting and retaining qualified early educators. I don't think I need to do any kind of an overview about Teach. We run a very similar program, and then talk about the CTE model that we have here in Florida. So as I mentioned, lots of changes that have occurred in the last 2 years. Obviously, we've had major issues around turnover. We have issues around student enrollment and actually places having to close classrooms because they can't find qualified educators, and difficulties with rehiring. We're seeing major challenges in that area in Florida, and I'm sure elsewhere as well. Florida is seeing a significant federal funding increase that's going to be coming to our state. And as we know, with that kind of funding, which is not sustainable, it is shorter term, there's usually a scramble on how this gets distributed and used locally and at a state level. That's going to create some interesting policy discussions. We're working toward a more systemic approach to our early learning system, and certainly funding will help with that. Again, the issue is going to be around sustainability and looking at quality programming through highly qualified educators. Obviously, we know the barriers to that are wage compensation issues, and we're really working toward having parity with our public school system for similarly qualified educators. So these are really the partners that work here on early education that are affiliated with the Children's Forum. Obviously, the Teach Early Childhood Scholarship Program in Florida, and we work closely with the Division of Early Learning as they're the funders for Teach and other programs that we administer. Okay, so I'm going to kind of skip through this because I know that we have a really good understanding of what Teach is, but at the same time, I really want to emphasize this last bullet, where in Florida, we have had some flexibility to be able to respond to the needs of the field. So we do a lot of needs assessment type data collection to find out what needs to happen to wrap around the early childhood education workforce. And what we've been able to do in this past year and a half is develop a computer reimbursement model so that for those who are active scholars, we call our participants scholars in Florida, we have created a $500 reimbursement for those who need to purchase some type of computer device, whether it's a laptop or it's a tablet. The reason we did that is we found when there was a shift during the pandemic to online learning, which happened very quickly, a very quick pivot, we had some of our active scholars who were actually trying to take classes on their phones. So we were able to implement this, and it's been a huge success, and our funder has agreed to allow us to do this. It's a one-time offer for active scholars. We also developed an infant toddler model that was more robust to try and encourage people to pursue that higher education. It's an area where we see the least amount of education and the lowest wage for our early educators. And then finally, the secondary CTE model. So how did this all come about? Well, we have an articulation committee in Florida comprised of stakeholders from all over the place, every region of the state. That includes our higher education educators and coordinators. It includes Head Start. It includes our Department of Education. It includes our Office of Early Learning, which is now called the Division of Early Learning. It included private providers, public providers. It was a very comprehensive committee. So a brainstorm back in 2015 and 16 led us to develop this CTE model. And we got approval to do it. And so we launched a pilot in 2016-17 in two of our largest school districts, Broward County and Miami-Dade, both of which are located down in Southern Florida. So that had, we'll go into the details in a minute, but that had over 300 students involved, and it was a great success. And we had granted permission to launch a statewide initiative with this same model the following year until the legislature cut the funding for Teach. And in doing so, we were not able to expand in 17-18 and instead had to basically scramble to maintain scholarships for our existing participants. So that was disappointing. But then in 2018-19, our full funding was restored and we were able to expand statewide. So that's really where most of these data that I'm going to talk about come from, is in the 2018-19 from the 2018-19 school year and graduates from that year. And then what we found, as everyone did, that our progress was impacted in 2019 and 20 and again 2021 because of COVID. So here's what it looks like. In 2016-17, we had 317 students. That was the pilot. Very high representation of Hispanic students because it was focused on South Florida. 2017-18 was the funding cut year. 2018-19 was the data collection year. And then we've continued with it in 19-20 and again 2021. You'll see those numbers are a little bit lower. And again, that's in part because of the pandemic. But we were really impressed that we still had significant numbers of students participating. It gives us almost 2,700 students that have received their national CDA and entered what we hope is the early childhood workforce or pursued education, higher education and early childhood education. And I'm going to show you some of the results of our study. So what does the model look like in Florida? Well, it is almost identical to the national CDA model. We are very fortunate in Florida to already have an established staff credential training program that's been incorporated into our career and technical education programs. So we have a Florida staff credential that aligns with the national CDA. So as students go through their high school program, if they meet all of these criteria, it mirrors the national CDA criteria, so it makes them eligible. I know that I've talked to a lot of states where they don't have that infrastructure in place, and so they have to start at more of a curriculum framework level. We already have that approved by our Board of Education, and it's implemented in a majority, I'm not going to say majority, it's implemented in many of our school districts right now. So we had that advantage. I just want to say that up front. So 120 hours, we know that that's required in terms of coursework. Our students take that over 3 to 4 years. There's also the 480 hours of field-based experience required, consistent with the national CDA. Our students also complete 45 hours of what we call foundational training, and that is offered through our Department of Children and Families. It's required for all educators in early childhood settings that are licensed or registered or license exempt. And then these students earn what's called an ECPC. It's the Early Childhood Professional Certificate. That, again, as I said, aligns with the national CDA. So what happened is Teach developed a scholarship model that pays for 85% of the cost of the assessment and application fees for that national CDA. That is $425 to take this assessment, and our school districts were trying, some of our school districts were trying to provide this support for the students, but obviously budgets were tight and it was difficult, and some districts just simply couldn't do that. So the students did graduate eligible for that ECPC, which is a state level credential, but not necessarily the national CDA unless they did that independently following high school. This provided an opportunity for us to provide the scholarship model for them and free up some of those resources for the district early childhood programs to use their funds in a different way. So you can see that they can graduate with either the ECPC or the national CDA or both. It's up to them what they choose to pursue or apply for, actually. So the study, let's talk a little bit about this because I want to share with you some of the data. I looked at, this was part of my doctoral dissertation, but I looked at the educational employment outcomes for those high school students who graduated in 2019. We administered a survey in the fall of 2019, so they graduated in the spring, spring, and then in the fall we provided the survey. We waited until after the add drop period so that we could capture the most reliable data on who went to college and stayed with it, et cetera. So we looked at the educational employment pathways. We looked at their perception of preparedness to work in the field. We also looked at some participant characteristics. Interestingly enough, those were not particularly robust in terms of any significant findings, but we'll talk a little bit about that here. Most importantly, I think, are the educational employment pathways, and I'm going to spend a little time on that. So this was, again, 18-19, pre-pandemic, thank goodness, because otherwise I would not have finished. So I appreciate that timing very, very much. We had 976 high school students that participated from around the state, and these data are based on survey responses from 41% of that population. The survey, as I mentioned, was administered following the 2018-19 academic year in the fall of 2019. We had 16 Florida school districts participate. And just to give you context, in Florida, there are 67 school districts. So we had 16 participate this particular year. We're actually up to 19 districts, and we still have, I think, 12 districts that are eligible. In other words, they have a comprehensive early childhood CTE program in their districts at least one of the high schools, but they have not chosen to engage with the TEACH program yet. A lot of that is because they're rural districts, and we know that administrators wear many hats. So that just advanced on its own. So we'll go to this slide. This shows you where the districts are located that we worked with. The shaded districts are those that participated. And what you can see here is that in that panhandle area, we had very little representation. That's something that we're working hard on. But again, those are rural districts. 81% of the students attended school in large suburban areas. About another 10% were in moderate sized suburban areas. Really wasn't worth looking at that too much further. We know, as is typical of the field, well, these are advancing on their own, I'm sorry. It's primarily female, and with the high school students, English was their preferred language. At least half of our students came from those 2 counties toward the bottom, well, actually 3 counties toward the bottom of the state, the south part of the state. Those were Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. Okay, so the employment pathways. Well, we found that 43% of respondents were actually employed in early childhood education settings following graduation. That was exciting for us, and it shows that there is a clear career pipeline from this high school program with the national credential to employment in early childhood settings. 57% of the students who were other employed, graduates, I should say, were actively looking for jobs in early childhood education, but they were currently employed in like restaurant, retail type industry positions. That again is very encouraging in terms of a pipeline. And of the 35% who indicated they were unemployed, the majority of those graduates were actually enrolled in college. So these are good data in terms of a potential pathway. One thing I do want to point out is for those employed in early childhood education, over 20% actually had a lead teacher role. And now we're talking about 18-year-olds coming out of a high school training program, entry-level competency, that are stepping into lead teacher roles. Almost 44% were in assistant teaching roles, but that 20% in lead teacher roles is something that we need to look at. So the educational pathways, what we found here was that 74% of the respondents were enrolled in a college degree program after graduation. So we got 3/4 of our students going directly into college. We wanted to see if they had selected early childhood as a major, and we found that a little disappointing, but only 12% had selected that. One caveat is that most of the respondents were enrolled in an AA, and we know that with an Associate of Arts, it tends to be a little more general, and there isn't that opportunity to really select a major. So there's still hope. 90% of those who were not currently enrolled said that they did intend to go to college at some point. And for those who said they were intending, gosh, I don't know why this is advancing, sorry. For those who said that they were intending to go to college, 28% said that they were interested in early childhood. So again, opportunity there. Half of them were interested in the education field in general. Okay. Preparedness in early childhood education, they all felt at least somewhat prepared, and 91% said they felt very prepared. They did indicate that there were some areas they'd like more training in education, and you can see on this chart that program operations, relationships with families, and observing and recording behavior were areas that the majority said they'd like to have some more support. Now, I do want to, let me go back to this for 1 second. What we're seeing here are people that are coming out feeling very confident in the field. So we don't want to lose that momentum. And this ties into one of my recommendations at the end around mentorship and coaching as they enter the field. So preparedness by age group, our ECPC, as I mentioned, the one that's in Florida specifically, focuses on the preschool age group. So what we saw, no surprise at all, is that the majority of them felt most confident working with 2 to 4-year-olds, least confident working with infant, toddlers, and early elementary school. That is no surprise at all. And in fact, that's what we'd like to see at this point. So when they indicated their perceived need for more training and experience, again, correlates very well with those perceptions. They felt like they wanted more direct experience with infants and tots as well as early elementary, and they wanted more education and training in those age groups as well. A little concerning here again is that we have a percentage, sorry about this advancing, we have a percentage that feel like they don't need any more direct experience or education and training. I'm sort of hoping those are the people that opt out of this career pathway. Okay, so race and ethnicity, as well as and looking at that in terms of employment status, really not too much to talk about here. The EC employed, that was consistent with the race and ethnicity in the study. Those who were other employed indicate that 60% identified as Hispanic, which is overrepresented, and only 23% identified as white, which was underrepresented. And the unemployed category, the lowest percentage of unemployed observed was in that Hispanic demographic. In terms of family education, we know that early childhood education, and TEACH in particular, targets those first-generation college students. And we did find that for those who are employed in early childhood education positions, the highest percentage, they represented the highest percentage of people who had no college credit earned within their family. So in other words, we're not seeing that historical pattern of college education for those who chose early childhood employment directly out of high school. Those who are other employed, those in the restaurant and retail industry, they had fewer members with degrees, but they also had the highest percentage of family members who had earned some college credit. So non-completers, but those who initiated college. And for those who were unemployed, 60% indicated that a parent or sibling had earned a college degree. Only 16% of this group indicated that no one in their family had earned any college credit. Keep in mind that for those who are unemployed, that was also the group that had the highest percentage of college attendance. So rate this race, ethnicity, and college enrollment. Over 74% of our participants did enroll in college. And what we see is that, let me go to this slide real quickly. What we're seeing here is that for those who were interested in pursuing college, you can see in the pie charts here what the different distributions are. So Hispanic of any race, we had 79% that enrolled in college. White students who identified as white, 73%. Students who identified as Black, 68% enrolled. And those who identified as other in terms of race, ethnicity, and only 35% enrolled in college. So I went through that fairly quickly. I wanted to leave a little time for questions if you have them, but I also want to discuss some of these implications. This PowerPoint presentation is available to you. You can look at the data more closely. Give me a call, send me an email, whatever works best for you, and I'd be happy to talk about this for longer than you want, I'm sure. But so what are some of the implications of this? Well, we know that high school, this EC CTE programs are a viable pipeline. They are a pipeline to the career. I think our concern is that the pipeline's a little leaky. And while that term is usually used to apply to female students that are in the STEM field, it does apply here too. So it's a pipeline, but we've got some leaks to fix. What we did find, as I mentioned, is that the participants felt they needed more training and experience post-graduation. Most of them did. And that helps helps our teach programs build the capacity to meet the needs of these educators. It gives us some direction in terms of the type of scholarship models that we need to develop, and the type of infrastructure that needs to be supported within Florida, at least. So one of the other things that we found is that our students that were graduating didn't actually understand or weren't aware that that staff credential they earned, whether it was the national, and all of the ones in this study did actually earn their national CDA, as well as the Florida staff credential, articulates to a minimum of 9 college credit hours at our state and community colleges for those students who are pursuing an associate degree. That is in rule here in Florida. It is automatic that it happens if somebody brings it to the attention of the state college. It's something that we really need to make more evident to our students, and that is something that we need to focus on with our state college coordinators in ECE programs. One of the other recommendations is that we coordinate virtual and in-person career fairs. We noticed that there were a significant number of students looking for, I call them students, they're graduates, looking for employment in early childhood education programs, but working in retail and restaurant industry because they haven't been able to find them. Given some of our challenges around hiring credentialed and qualified staff, that seems to be a missed opportunity. So one of the suggestions that I have is that we maybe set up some virtual and in-person career fairs to try and match employers with these qualified educators. We have a program here, and I know many of the states throughout the country have this. It is, we call it early childhood educator incentives, but it's called wages in other programs. We had to make that change because of the way our legislation was perceiving the term wages in our title. So by changing it to incentives, we obviously had to do some outreach and education around the fact that it is the same program, but they were seeing it as something that would supplant as opposed to supplementing, and that was not going to be good. We'd love to see that statewide, excuse me, while Teach is a statewide program, incentives is local. And so we have 3 counties in Florida that have implemented incentives. It's very frustrating for early educators in other counties that, excuse me, don't have access to incentives, and we're working very hard to get that approved and implemented at a statewide level. We know that compensation, excuse me, is one of the biggest issues that prevents interested early educators entering and staying in the field. We also recommend a structured mentorship program for new early educators. And for directors who would invest time and other resources into this type of a mentorship program, we'd love to be able to provide bonuses and ongoing professional development for those educators who enter the field as new employees. So that is the presentation. What I'd like to do is open it up for some questions. I will stop sharing my screen here, and maybe we can look and see if anybody has any questions or comments or ideas. I'm open to anything that you might have. And now that I'm on the other screen, I'm going to move my camera one more time.
Sure. And while they're entering those questions in the question and answer, I wanted to share a little bit, Denise, for the audience as well as you, to provide a little bit of context of the Ohio pieces that we have, and and how they kind of mirror some of the Florida efforts.
Excellent.
So our curriculum that we have in Career Tech was revised about 3 years ago, and there's 9 modules that Career Tech teachers can choose from. And 3 of those modules bear college credit. So it's possible if they are selected that they get 3 credit hours per course. So over the course of a junior and senior year in career tech, 4 of those modules are selected. So, and it's at the teacher's discretion which module is a part of those 4.
Okay.
In our system, we average about 1,200 students, and that includes juniors and seniors. It's statewide. So again, as we're looking at that pipeline piece, it is a decent number of students. We too provide some scholarships for career tech. So our CDA assessment fee scholarship is utilized in this case to help those students who have prepared during their career tech journey to take the CDA and move that forward. We provide some funding for that as well.
Excellent. So
yes,
your numbers are fantastic. I mean, 1,200 annually is a great influx into the field. So that's wonderful. And it sounds like you have a similar articulation for the 9 credit hours. So again, that is excellent. One of the things I didn't mention about our model is we did set it up so that we can provide a completion bonus for our scholars. So we pay for 85% of the cost of that assessment fee and application fee. And then we also, that 15% that they're responsible for in terms of the partnership, we never exchange any money. So the bonus is actually $163.75. We pull that $63.75 out to address the 15%, and they get a check for $100. So nice. That's how we got around encouraging them, keeping them involved, but also we're doing some follow-up now to say, hey, you got your CDA, not sure what you did, but if you're interested in a teach scholarship, we're here for you, et cetera, et cetera. We are talking about doing a follow-up survey with these students to find out where they are today. Nice. And we wanted to do that last year. Obviously, it wasn't, timing was off to do that. So we're hoping to do that in the fall of next year and just follow up with them and say, you know, what have you done? Why did you make the decisions you did? Where are you in your life right now? So nice. Excellent.
One of the challenges that we have found, and I don't know if it's similar in Florida, but the modules that I talked about that bear college credit, we seem to have a little bit of a duplication because as we're looking at articulation from CDA credential to associate, it appears that those courses for career tech that they would get credit for at the college level, so would they get credit for with a CDA. So it doesn't provide additional support there. So right now, our Ohio curriculum is going to undergo a revision as just the timing of that they do every so often. And so we're hoping that some of that gets taken into account as they're considering what those revisions might look like and including some higher ed perspective to, again, try to make that as seamless as possible.
Got it. Got it. Let me take a quick look at some of these questions that have come in. Do you have any indication regarding employment in the field in terms of whether students were employed before graduating or after graduation? That's an excellent question. We don't have those data right now. I do think that it's worth finding out if we do a subsequent survey with those who are just leaving the field. I know that during the pandemic, we had a significant number of students who were struggling to get their hours in, the 480 hours, because they weren't allowed to be in outside settings and what have you. Some places got creative and brought them in the summer for employment positions so that they know they were going to be there as part of their staff. But I think that's a really good question to ask, is whether they were employed throughout high school. And if that's the case, it provides a stronger pathway supportive argument, I think. So that's a great question. And I think it's something that should be added to a survey. What are the 9 credit hour courses? I'm guessing that it's health and safety and nutrition is one of them. Yes, that would be one of them. So our schools are our community colleges and state colleges offer the credential. We call it an FCCPC. It's basically the staff credential training. And it can range from 12 credit hours to 15 credit hours, depending on your certificate program. And I am actually not sure if it's a consistent same 3 classes that are they're provided the 9 credit hours for. I can get that information and get back to you. My gut feeling is saying that it's not consistent across each college, but I'll have to find out about that. Both in Ohio and Florida, great influx into the field. I agree with that. Do we have data on retention after teach mandates are met? And as I typed this, I hear Denise mention follow-up plans. Okay, excellent. Question for Judith. This one's for you, Judith.
Yeah. So there's a couple of questions about the participation distribution across Ohio, and then how many of those are moving along the early childhood pathway. And we don't have data on that specifically for the greater whole, so the entire population in career tech. We do know a little bit more about those that participate in the CDA assessment scholarship, about those distributions and such. So I can definitely follow up with that information.
Excellent. I think one of the things that I found with the study that I did was some of their comments that they made in open text on the survey was very, very interesting. Majority of them loved their programs, really appreciated the opportunity to gain these skills throughout high school. Very, very positive feedback about their programs. And that in and of itself is pretty encouraging. I would love to be able to meet these students and graduates where they are upon graduation and just really provide a supportive environment that retains them within the field for those who are interested. But again, it's the compensation issue. And we even have early childhood programs at our state colleges that are closing down because they're not considered high wage careers. And so they're being cut from programs. And we have students being counseled out of early childhood education because they're not going to be able to make a living wage. Those are really frightening. If I think this pandemic has taught us anything, it's how essential our early childhood programs are to our economy. And, as the economist Paul Romer said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And quite frankly, we're in the middle of a crisis that is shining a spotlight on early childhood. And I believe that we need to pull together and really take advantage of this opportunity to say, what are you going to do without early childhood? And what's going to happen if we invest and it's not quality? And if people leave, we're seeing classrooms closing all over the place and difficulty with rehiring. So we have to have a pipeline. We have to have adequate compensation with living wages, and we've got to be able to wrap around these people, or we are going to lose our field. I mean, it's crisis mode right now.
It is.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments or anything? I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this. Sorry if I blew through it really quickly, but feel free to contact me at any time, and I'm happy to talk at leisure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Denise, for joining us. Any final comments or questions for Denise?
I think we're good.
Again, awesome.
Look, and we did it in time. That's great.
There you go.
Awesome. Actually, please feel free to just even take a picture of this slide if you want to and shoot me an email, and I'm happy to have further discussion. I'd love to hear your ideas for things that we can include in a follow-up survey. And again, when things settle in the world a little bit, that's what we're going to do. Hopefully it'll be in the fall.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Denise. We appreciate you joining us this morning.
Okay, thanks so much, everybody. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.